I'm pretty sure that most of us are afraid of death in some way. Those I've met that aren't tend to have looked at it or faced it already in some manner. So I ask of you now, there's no right or wrong answer here. Raise your hand if you're afraid to die. Thank you. So I'm going to ask a few more questions. Don't worry about raising your hand for these. This is just for your consideration. If you were to find out that you only have a short time left to live, do you want to be worrying about who your next of kin is or how you want your body cared for if you haven't thought about that already? If you do unexpectedly die, do you want your loved ones to have to be trying to guess what you would want while they're grieving, again, if you haven't already? Or if a loved one comes to you and tells you that someone they love has died, what can you say to them that's truly considerate? So I ask a lot of questions. Do you like talking about any aspect of personal death? The philosophical, the scientific, the more spiritual? I think these questions are necessary. Death is such a socially taboo topic. Not a lot of people like facing it. Even though, and I'm going to say this with confidence, using the universal we, it is the one guaranteed experience that we will all share. So it's not often that you're somewhere and someone comes up to you and says, I haven't seen you in so long. I've been meaning to ask you, what do you think about death? Right? So about 12 years ago, I almost died in a car accident. While I was healing with a brain injury, I noticed there was this distance between myself, my newfound awareness of death, and those around me. No one was actually talking about it. There was a lot of talk about happiness, which I appreciate. Facing death brought me a lot closer to experiencing moments of happiness while I'm living. That whole saying, live each moment as though it's your last, had a whole new meaning for me. But that was in keeping with my living moments. When I thought about death still, it still scared me. I still felt a lot of fear. So happy and death are not words we often put together in the same sentence. In life, we tend to run towards happiness and turn our back on reality. And reality is often laced with fear. So I find in my life I've come closer to what I consider true happiness when I turn and face reality. But when I'm thinking about the idea of death, it's kind of difficult because while I'm living, death is just that, it's an idea, one that I don't actually experientially want to enact. So how can I face it? Last year, I started researching this again. It took me about 10 years to have the courage to really jump into it. And I found that distance again between myself, my awareness of it, and this time it was twice removed. What had been written down seemed so distant from me. The resource that I was looking to learn from was still really difficult to access. And that resource was basically you. It was my peers, my community, my family, my friends. I wanted to talk about death with the people that are around me. So also in my research, I came up with a lot more questions than answers. I decided in my practice to make a game out of these questions. And I do this because it's not really a game. It's more a tool I use to facilitate conversations on death. It's called Death Conversation Game. Pretty basic. Straight to the point. I've used this game to facilitate several conversations in the past year in a lot of different situations with different groups. And sometimes the same people will sit with me in more than one session. And this is interesting because sometimes the answers remain the same, but often, like life, the answers change. And one of the big benefits that I've found to talking about death is that my understanding from my own unexpected sharing, as well as the unexpected sharings of those that I'm talking with, my understanding of death exponentially grows, and it becomes less of a domineering subject for me. One of the other benefits is when we think about death, it's binary. We have death and life, black and white. But there's so much gray area in between. So if we're not talking about it, it remains kind of stagnant. I have my understanding on that gray area. You have yours. We've each kind of touched it in some way. But if we're not sharing about it, it stays there. But if we talk about it, I now know yours, you know mine, and then that grows the more and more we speak on it. The Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, well known for her work on death and dying, has stated, if we can accept and face the reality of our own death, we can achieve peace. So we can achieve our own inner peace as well as peace between nations. So I say, you choose who you have these conversations with. Whether it's your friends, your peers, your family, strangers, you name it. The more that we open ourselves to having conversations about death, the less alien a subject it will be. So the more we share what we can know about death while we're alive, whether we're afraid of it or not, we can change our living relationships to death from fear to the greater forms of happiness, peace, and serenity. So thank you.